This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Enchanted Island of You by L. Frank Baum. Read by Ted DeLorme in Fort Mill, South Carolina, during November 2006. Chapter 14, The Ki and the Ki. From the tops of the hills the travelers caught their first glimpse of the wonderful cities of Twi. Two walls surrounded the cities, and in the walls were two gates just alike. Within the enclosures stood many houses, but all were built in pairs, from the poorest huts to the most splendid palaces. Every street was double, the pavements running side by side. There were 2 lamp-posts on every corner, and in the dim twilight that existed these lamp-posts were quite necessary. If there were trees or bushes anywhere, they invariably grew in pairs, and if a branch was broken on one, it was sure to be broken on the other, and dead leaves fell from both trees at identically the same moment. Much of this Marvel and Nerle learned after they had entered the cities, but the view from the hills showed plainly enough that the double plan existed everywhere and in every way in this strange land. They followed the paths down to the gates of the walls, where 2 pairs of soldiers rushed out and seized their horses by the bridles. These soldiers all seemed to be twins, or at least mates, and each one of each pair was as like the other as are 2 peas growing in the same pod. If one had a red nose, the other's was red in the same degree, and the soldiers that held the bridles of Nerle's horse both had their left eyes bruised and blackened, as if from a blow of the same force. These soldiers, as they looked upon Nerle and the prince, seemed fully as much astonished and certainly more frightened than their prisoners. They were dressed in bright yellow uniforms with green buttons, and the soldiers who had arrested the prince had both torn their left coat sleeves and had patches of the same shape upon the seats of their trousers. "How dare you stop us, fellows?" asked the prince sternly. The soldiers holding his horse both turned and looked inquiringly at the soldiers holding Nerle's horse, and these turned to look at a double captain who came out of 2 doors in the wall and walked up to them. "Such things were never before heard of," said the 2 captains, their startled eyes fixed upon the prisoners. "We must take them to the Ki and the Ki." "Why so?" asked Prince Marvel.
"Because," replied the officers, "they are our rulers under grace of the High Ki, and all unusual happenings must be brought to their notice. It is our law, you know, the law of the Kingdom of Twi."
"Very well," said Marvel quietly. "Take us where you will, but if any harm is intended us, you will be made to regret it."
"The Ki and the Ki will decide,"
returned the captains gravely, their words sounding at the same instant. And then the 2 pairs of soldiers led the horses through the double streets, the captains marching ahead with drawn swords, and crowds of twin men and twin women coming from the double doors of the double houses to gaze upon the strange sight of men and horses who were not double. Presently they came upon a twin palace with twin turrets rising high into the air, and before the twin doors the prisoners dismounted. Marvel was escorted through one door and Nerle through another, and then they saw each other going down a double hallway to a room with a double entrance. Passing through this, they found themselves in a large hall with 2 domes set side by side in the roof. The domes were formed of stained glass, and the walls of the hall were ornamented by pictures in pairs, each pair showing identically the same scenes. This was, of course, reasonable enough in such a land where 2 people would always look at 2 pictures at the same time and admire them in the same way with the same thoughts. Beneath one of the domes stood a double throne on which sat the Ki of Twi, a pair of gray-bearded and bald-headed men who were lean and lank and stoop-shouldered. They had small eyes, black and flashing, long hooked noses, great pointed ears, and they were smoking 2 pipes from which the smoke curled in exactly the same circles and clouds. Beneath the other dome sat the Ki of Twi, also on double thrones, similar to those of the Ki. The Ki were 2 young men, and had golden hair combed over their brows and banged straight across, and their eyes were blue and mild in expression, and their cheeks pink and soft. The Ki were playing softly upon a pair of musical instruments that resembled mandolins, and they were evidently trying to learn a new piece of music, for when one Ki struck a false note, the other Ki struck the same false note at the same time, and the same expression of annoyance came over the 2 faces at the same moment. When the prisoners entered, the pair of captains and soldiers bowed low to the 2 pairs of rulers, and the Ki exclaimed, both in the same voice of surprise,
"Great Kikaku, what have we here?"
"Most wonderful prisoners, your highness," answered the captains.
"We found them at your city's gates and brought them to you at once. They are, as your highness will see, each singular, and but half of what he should be."
"'Tis so!" cried the double Ki in loud voices, and slapping their right thighs with their right palms at the same time.
"Most remarkable, most remarkable!"
"I don't see anything remarkable about it," returned Prince Marvel calmly. "It is you who are not singular, but double, that seems strange and outlandish."
Perhaps, said the 2 old men thoughtfully. "It is what we are not accustomed to that seems to us remarkable. Eh, Ki?"
they added, turning to the other rulers. The Ki, who had not spoken a word but continued to play softly, simply nodded their blond heads carelessly. So the Ki looked again at the prisoners and asked,
"How did you get here?"
"We cut a hole through the prickly hedge," replied Prince Marvel.
"A hole through the hedge? Oh, great Kikaku!" cried the gray-bearded Ki. "Is there, then, anything or any place on the other side of the hedge?"
"Why, of course. The world is there," returned the prince, laughing. The old men looked puzzled, and glanced sharply from their little black eyes at the prisoners.
"We thought nothing existed outside the hedge of Twi," they answered simply. "But your presence here proves we were wrong. Eh, Ki?"
This last was again directed toward the pair of musicians, who continued to play and only nodded quietly as before.
"Now that you are here,"
said the twin Ki, stroking their 2 gray beards with their 2 left hands in a nervous way,
"it must be evident to you that you do not belong here. Therefore, you must go back through the hedge again and stay on the other side. Eh, Ki?"
The Ki still continued playing, but now spoke the first words the prisoners had heard from them.
"I must die,"
said the Ki in soft, agreeable voices.
"Die?" echoed the twin Ki. "Die? Great Kikaku! And why so?" "Because if there is a world on the other side of the hedge, they would tell on their return all about the land of Twi, and others of their kind would come through the hedge from curiosity and annoy us. We cannot be annoyed. We are busy." Having delivered this speech, both the Ki went on playing the new tune, as if the matter was settled. "Nonsense!" retorted the old Ki angrily. "You are getting more and more bloodthirsty every day, our sweet and gentle Ki. But we are the Ki, and we say the prisoners shall not die."
"We say they shall," answered the youthful Ki, nodding their two heads at the same time with a positive motion.
"You may be the Ki, but we are the Ki, and you're superior." "Not in this case," declared the old men. "Where life and death are concerned, we have equal powers with you."
"And if we disagree?" asked the players gently.
"Oh, great Kikaku, if we disagree, the High Ki must judge between us," roared the twin Ki excitedly.
"Quite so," answered the Ki. "The strangers must die."
"They shall not die,"
stormed the old men with fierce gestures toward the others, while both pairs of black eyes flashed angrily.
"And we disagree, and they must be taken to the High Ki,"
returned the blond musicians, beginning to play another tune. The two Ki rose from their thrones, paced 2 steps to the right and 3 steps to the left, and then sat down again.
"Very well,"
they said to the captains, who had listened unmoved to the quarrel of the rulers.
"Keep these half-men safe prisoners until tomorrow morning, and then the Ki and we ourselves will conduct them to the mighty High Ki."
At this command the twin captains bowed again to both pairs of rulers and led Prince Marvel and Nerle from the room. Then they were escorted along the streets to the twin houses of the captains, and here the officers paused and scratched their left ears with uncertain gestures.
"There being only half of each of you," they said, "we do not know how to lock each of you in double rooms."
"Oh, let us occupy the same room," said Prince Marvel. "We prefer it."
"Very well," answered the captains. "We must transgress our usual customs in any event, so you may as well be lodged as you wish."
So Nerle and the prince were thrust into a large and pleasant room of one of the twin houses. The double doors were locked upon them by twin soldiers, and they were left to their own thoughts. End Chapter 14. Chapter 15. The High Ki of Twi. "Tell me, Prince, are we awake or asleep?" asked Nerle as soon as they were alone. "There is no question of our being awake," replied the prince with a laugh. "But what a curious country it is, and what a funny people!" "We can't call them odd or singular," said the esquire, "for everything is even in numbers and double in appearance. It makes me giddy to look at them, and I keep feeling of myself to make sure there is still only one of me." "You are but half a boy," laughed the prince. "At least so long as you remain in the land of Twi." "I'd like to get out of it in double quick time," answered Nerle. "And we should even now be on the other side of the hedge, were it not for that wicked pair of Ki who are determined to kill us." "It is strange," said the prince thoughtfully, "that the fierce-looking old Ki should be our friends, and the gentle Ki our enemies. How little one can tell from appearances what sort of heart beats in a person's body." Before Nerle could answer, the 2 doors opened, and 2 pairs of soldiers entered. They drew 2 small tables before the prince and 2 before Nerle, and then other pairs of twin soldiers came and spread cloths on the tables and set twin platters of meat and bread and fruit on each of the tables. When the meal had been arranged, the prisoners saw that there was enough for 4 people instead of 2, and the soldiers realized this also, for they turned puzzled looks first on the tables and then on the prisoners. Then they shook all their twin heads gravely and went away, locking the twin doors behind them. "We have one advantage in being singular," said Nerle cheerfully, "and that is we are not likely to starve to death, for we can eat the portions of our missing twins as well as our own." "I should think you would enjoy starving," remarked the prince. "No, I believe I have more exquisite suffering in store for me, since I have met that gentle pair of Ki," said Nerle. While they were eating, the 2 captains came in and sat down in 2 chairs. These captains seemed friendly fellows, and after watching the strangers for a while, they remarked,
"We are glad to see you able to eat so heartily, for tomorrow you will probably die."
"That is by no means certain," replied Marvel, cutting a piece from one of the twin birds on a platter before him, to the extreme surprise of the captains, who had always before seen both birds carved alike at the same time. "Your gray-bearded old Ki say we shall not die."
"True," answered the captains, "but the Ki have declared you shall."
"Their powers seem to be equal," said Nerle, "and we are to be taken before the High Ki for judgment."
"Therein lies your danger,"
returned the captain, speaking in the same tones and with the same accents on their words.
"For it is well known the Ki has more influence with the High Ki than the Ki has."
"Hold on," cried Nerle. "You are making me dizzy again. I can't keep track of all these Kis." "What is the High Ki like?" asked Prince Marvel, who was much interested in the conversation of the captains. But this question the officers seemed unable to answer. They shook their heads slowly and said:
"The High Ki are not visible to the people of Twi. Only in cases of the greatest importance are the High Ki ever bothered or even approached by the Ki and the Ki, who are supposed to rule the land according to their own judgment. But if they chance to disagree, then the matter is carried before the High Ki, who live in a palace surrounded by high walls in which there are no gates. Only these rulers have ever seen the other side of the walls, or know what the High Ki are like."
"That is strange," said the prince. "But we ourselves, it seems, are to see the High Ki tomorrow, and whoever they may chance to be, we hope to remain alive after the interview."
"That is a vain hope," answered the captains, "for it is well known that the High Ki usually decide in favor of the Ki against the wishes of the old Ki."
"That is certainly encouraging," said Nerle. When the captains had gone and left them to themselves, the esquire confided to his master his expectations in the following speech: "This High Ki sounds something terrible and fierce in my ears, and as they are doubtless a pair, they will be twice terrible and fierce. Perhaps his royal doublets will torture me most exquisitely before putting me to death, and then I shall feel that I have not lived in vain." They slept in comfortable beds that night, although an empty twin bed stood beside each one they occupied. And in the morning they were served another excellent meal, after which the captains escorted them again to the twin palaces of the Ki and the Ki. There the two pairs of rulers met them and headed the long procession of soldiers toward the palace of the High Ki. First came a band of music, in which many queer sorts of instruments were played in pairs by twin musicians, and it was amusing to Nerle to see the twin drummers roll their twin drums exactly at the same time, and the twin trumpets peal out twin notes. After the band marched the double Ki and the double Ki, their four bodies side by side in a straight line. The Ki had left their musical instruments in the palace, and now wore yellow gloves with green stitching down the backs, and swung gold-headed canes jauntily as they walked. The Ki stooped their aged shoulders and shuffled along with their hands in their pockets, and only once did they speak, and that was to roar, "Great Kika-Koo!" when the Ki jabbed their canes down on the Ki's toes. Following the Ki and the Ki came the prince and Nerle, escorted by the twin captains, and then there were files of twin soldiers bringing up the rear. Crowds of twin people, with many twin children amongst them, turned out to watch the unusual display, and many pairs of twin dogs barked together in unison and snapped at the heels of the marching twin soldiers. By and by they reached the great wall surrounding the High Ki's palace, and sure enough there was never a gate in the wall by which any might enter. But when the Ki and the Ki had blown a shrill signal upon 2 pairs of whistles, they all beheld 2 flights of silver steps begin to descend from the top of the wall, and these came nearer and nearer the ground until at last they rested at the feet of the Ki. Then the old men began ascending the steps carefully and slowly, and the captains motioned to the prisoners to follow. So Prince Marvel followed one of the Ki up the steps, and Nerle the other Ki, while the 2 Ki came behind them so they could not escape. So to the top of the wall they climbed, where a pair of twin servants in yellow and green, which seemed to be the royal colors, welcomed them and drew up the pair of silver steps, afterward letting them down on the other side of the wall, side by side. They descended in the same order as they had mounted to the top of the wall, and now Prince Marvel and Nerle found themselves in a most beautiful garden, filled with twin beds of twin flowers with many pairs of rare shrubs. Also there were several double statuettes on pedestals, and double fountains sending exactly the same sprays of water the same distance into the air. Double walks ran in every direction through the garden, and in the center of the enclosure stood a magnificent twin palace, built of blocks of white marble exquisitely carved. The Ki and the Ki at once led their prisoners toward the palace, and entered at its large arched double doors, where several pairs of servants met them. These servants, they found, were all dumb, so that should they escape from the palace walls they could tell no tales of the High Ki. The prisoners now proceeded through several pairs of halls, winding this way and that, and at last came to a pair of golden double doors leading into the throne room of the mighty High Ki. Here they all paused, and the Ki both turned to the prince and Nerle and said, "You are the only persons, excepting ourselves and the palace servants, who have ever been permitted to see the High Ki of Twi. As you are about to die, that does not matter, but should you by any chance be permitted to live, you must never breathe a word of what you are about to see, under penalty of a sure and horrible death." The prisoners made no reply to this speech, and after the 2 Ki had given them another mild look from their gentle blue eyes, these officials clapped their twin hands together, and the doors of gold flew open. A perfect silence greeted them, during which the double Ki and the double Ki bent their 4 bodies low and advanced into the throne room, followed by Prince Marvel and Nerle. In the center of the room stood 2 thrones of dainty filigree work in solid gold, and over them were canopies of yellow velvet, the folds of which were caught up and draped with bands of green ribbon. And on the throne were seated 2 of the sweetest and fairest little maidens that mortal man had ever beheld. Their lovely hair was fine as a spider's web. Their eyes were kind and smiling, their cheeks soft and dimpled, their mouths shapely as a cupid's bow and tinted like the petals of a rose. Upon their heads were set 2 crowns of fine spun gold, worked into fantastic shapes and set with glittering gems. Their robes were soft silks of pale yellow, with strings of sparkling emeralds for ornaments. Anything so lovely and fascinating as these little maids, who were precisely alike in every particular, neither Prince Marvel nor Nerle had ever dreamed could exist. They stood for a time spellbound and filled with admiration, while the 2 pairs of rulers bowed again and again before the dainty and lovable persons of their High Ki. But it was hard for Nerle to keep quiet for long, and presently he exclaimed, in a voice loud enough to be heard by all present, And by the great Kikaku of our friend Sakai, these darling High Ki of Twi are sweet enough to be kissed. End chapter 15. This story will continue on the next recording.